A tire company decides what food matters. Say it slowly. Let it land. A company that makes rubber, that manufactures things that go on the bottom of your car and slowly wear down against asphalt. That company, for over a century, has been the single most powerful arbiter of culinary excellence on the planet. Chefs have lost sleep over it. Restaurants have gone bankrupt chasing it. Grown adults, people who have spent decades mastering the fire and knife and flavor, have wept when they got it. They wept even harder when they lost it. And it all started because a couple of French brothers wanted people to drive more. That's it. That's the whole origin story. Welcome to this week's episode of Unhospitality.
Unhospitality, the #1 podcast in the world.
Hi guys, welcome back. I'm Jeremy, and today we're going to do something I've wanted to do for a long time. We're going to put the Michelin guide on trial. Not because I think good food doesn't deserve recognition. It does. Not because I think every chef who has a star is undeserving. Many of them are extraordinary. But because of the story of how we got here and how a rubber manufacturer became the Vatican of the culinary world is one of the most bizarre culinary loaded and quietly destructive stories in the history of food. And almost nobody talks about it straight. So let's talk about it straight, yeah? So picture this. The year is 1900. Andre and Edward Michelin run a tire company in France. Now, there were fewer than 3,000 cars in the entire country. So business is not exactly booming, right? There's not a lot of cars to sell tires to. So they did something brilliant, in fact. They published a guide. It has hotels, gas stations, mechanics, restaurants. And the idea is very simple. Get people driving. Get people traveling. Get people stopping at various places. And eventually get people buying tires. It was essentially a marketing pamphlet, a coupon book with better branding, and they literally gave it away for free. Now, for the next 2 decades, that's all it was. It was a practical travel tool, useful in a way that like a AAA map is useful. It's utilitarian even. Nobody is staking their identity on it, right? And then in 1926, a star was born, and not in the Hollywood kind of way. They came up with a star rating system for restaurants. 1 star for a good restaurant. And a couple years later, in 1931, the system as we know it today, 1 star is worth a detour, 2 stars worth a special trip, and 3 stars, and I want you to really hear this, 3 stars means it's worth planning an entire journey around. Worth planning an entire journey around. So now we have this tire company. Now they had people rerouting their entire lives because of their rating system that they established in 1931. Here's the part that almost never gets said out loud. Nobody asked them to do this. There was no democratic process, no culinary council or chefs or food writers or cultural stakeholders who convened and said, you know what, let's hand it to these rubber guys, the Michelin people. They just did it. They appointed themselves as these influencers, I guess, and the world somehow went along. Now, that is a con of staggering proportions, and I mean that with kind of awe. Talk about blazing a trail where there was none. Now, let's talk about what that self-appointment has actually meant for the world of food, because this is where it stops being funny and it starts being actually something else entirely. For most of Michelin's history, the guide existed in Europe, France primarily. Then slowly, other European countries adopted it. The aesthetic it developed, the criteria it encoded, well, they were very French. Classical technique, formal service, quiet rooms, expensive ingredients, wineless tablecloths. There was a particular idea of what a serious meal looked like. Now, that idea is not neutral. Let me repeat that. That idea is not neutral. It is cultural. It's specific. It is the product of a very particular place, class, and century. And for decades, it was the only one that counted. Now, here is where I want you to sit with something that's going to make you a little bit uncomfortable, okay? When you hear the word fine dining, what do you picture? Take a second. Actually picture what you see as a fine dining experience. If I'm guessing, it's not a grandmother's kitchen in rural Mexico. I'm guessing it's not a food stall on the streets of Kuala Lumpur, even if the food there would make you weep. I'm guessing it's not a slow-cooked bowl of ajiaco, or perhaps sancocho in Colombia that's cooked slowly over a wood fire, or a Georgian feast laid out on a long table with people arguing over bread and wine and who loves who, that's probably not what you're thinking when you think of fine dining. I'm guessing it's white tablecloths, hush rooms, tasting menus, a sommelier speaking softly, a server explaining the finer details of the butter. And here's my question: where did that picture come from? Who put it there in your head? Because that image, that very specific, very European, very expensive image of what serious food looks like, didn't emerge from some universal consensus. It was taught, it was marketed, it was reinforced decade after decade by systems exactly like the Michelin Guide. Systems that decided without asking anyone that one way of eating was the standard and everything else was regional, rustic, or ethnic. Words that in food criticism have historically meant interesting, but not quite serious. Think about what that has meant in practice. The cuisines of West Africa, Southeast Asia, of Mexico, of India, of the entire African diaspora. Traditions that are thousands of years old, and yes, technically demanding at a level that will probably break most classically trained chefs. Deeply meaningful to the people who make and eat them. For most of Michelin's existence, those traditions were either invisible to the guide or footnoted as curiosities. A roadie stall in the streets of India, a taco al pastor stand in Mexico City, recipes cooked by someone who learned from their mother, learning from someone's mother going way back generations. Not what Michelin was built to see. And we absorbed that, all of us. We learned, without anyone saying it directly, that some food gets to be art and some food gets to be quote unquote authentic. And those are not the same category. Art gets reviewed, art gets stars, authentic gets appreciated, warmly, somewhat condescendingly, and then left off the list. Now, Michelin has expanded. Tokyo now has more starred restaurants than any city in the world. Bangkok, Singapore, Hong Kong. The guide has moved. And to be fair, some of that expansion has surfaced extraordinary places that deserve recognition. There's no doubt about that. But I need you to ask the follow up question: who calibrated the inspectors? What do they train on? What is the baseline against which all of this gets measured? Because if the instrument was built in France in 1931, if the tuning fork was struck in a Parisian dining room, what does it actually hear when it walks into a kitchen in rural Argentina? When it sits down at a Sichuan street stall? Does it hear the food on its own terms? Or does it hear the food in translation, measured against a standard it was never ever built to meet? I once heard somebody put it like this: if you judge a fish and its abilities by whether they can climb a tree or not, you're going to give that fish very low ratings on their abilities, right? But fish, of course, were never designed to climb trees. They were built to swim. We need to judge things against different backdrops and in different situations and different contexts. In 2019, a Bangkok street food vendor named Jay Fai, a woman who's been cooking crab omelets over charcoal in an open front kitchen for 40 years. Well, guess what? She got a Michelin star. And it was genuinely deserved. It was wonderful. She earned it and then some. And then the prices tripled. The wait became weeks. The entire neighborhood shifted around her. The thing that made her extraordinary, the accessibility, the directness, the fact that it was just her and the fire every single day for 40 years, it started to calcify into a performance of itself. She became an attraction, a destination, a thing to photograph. Michelin shone a light on J-Fi, and that light burned. That's not an accident. That's not an unfortunate side effect. That's what happens when a system optimized for a specific kind of expensive European formal dining tries to wrap its arms around something it was never designed to hold. It doesn't just celebrate. It transforms. It lifts the thing up, and in doing so, it changes what that thing is. And the saddest part, we cheer for it. We're part of the ecosystem. We share the article. We post it on Instagram. We feel good about how open-minded we are and how open-minded the global guide has become. But ask yourself, open-minded on whose terms? Global by whose definition? See, the bias isn't always in what Michelin excludes. Sometimes it's in how it includes, what it requires something to become in order to be seen. So let me tell you about Sebastian Bras. In 2017, the French chef Sebastian Bras did something almost no one had ever done. He walked away. He asked Michelin to remove him from the guide. He had held 3 stars for nearly 2 decades. His restaurant, Le Souquet, in the south of France, it was considered one of the great temples of French cuisine. And he walked. He said, "Peace out." He unlocked the golden handcuffs and placed them neatly back in the box from where they came. He said he wanted the freedom to cook without the pressure. Let that sink in. Without the inspectors, without the weight of an institution constantly looking over his shoulder every second. Michelin, to their credit, honored the request. But ask yourself what it took to get there, what it cost him for over 20 years to maintain that, the staffing levels required, the sourcing, the service standards, the consistency. Not the consistency of a craftsman honing his art, but the consistency of a system that cannot afford to have a night off because someone might be watching that could unravel the entire story. Sebastian Bras is not an outlier. He's just one of the ones who said it out loud. Same with Francis Mallmann, by the way, who, if you haven't seen his episode on the Netflix series Chef's Table, I recommend you pause this video, run to your TV, and watch it right now. It's one of the better episodes of television I've ever seen. And his story about how he walked away from what he considered lucrative and successful, it hit me right in the solar plex. It was beautiful. In fact, Mallmann said about the potential of receiving a Michelin star after having geared so much of his career towards wanting one, he had a shift. What he said was, after nearly 50 years of professional cooking, I sincerely hope not to receive a Michelin star. And if I did, I wouldn't accept it. Let us share bread, thoughts, and romance, holding hands as long as there is hope. I mean, what a quote. Talk about a mic drop. And of course, you've seen Ratatouille, right? The 2007 Pixar animated film. Well, you might not know this, but the chef's character, Chef Augustin Gusteau, he was partly inspired by a wildly famous and popular French chef named Bernard Lousseau. He had 3 Michelin stars and he was one of the most celebrated chefs in all of France. In 2003, sadly, he died by suicide, amid rumors that his restaurant might lose a star. The relationship between that pressure and his death is complex, and I don't want to flatten it. He was deeply in debt and suffered through bouts of depression. But the people who knew him said the fear of losing the star had become all consuming. The guide had become something you couldn't live with and you couldn't live without. Now, a tire company did that. A tire company. I'm not being glib, I'm being precise. The system that creates that level of psychological dependency, that makes a human being feel that their worth is tied to the opinion of an anonymous inspector working for a rubber manufacturer, that system has consequences. And we have been very slow to name them. Mallmann's quote bears repeating: let us share bread, thoughts, and romance, holding hands as long as there is hope. What a beautiful way to talk about reframing our expectations. Here's where I'm going to resist the easy ending, okay? The easy ending is Michelin is bad, tear it down, let the people decide, 5-star Yelp reviews for everyone, trust the crowd and trust the public, right? But you know what? The crowd is not neutral either. The crowd has its own biases, its own algorithms, its own economics. The most reviewed restaurant in any city is not necessarily the most deserving one. Look no further than the global reach of McDonald's to understand that virality is not necessarily some kind of reflection of excellence. And excellence, real hard won, technically demanding, culturally rooted excellence, does deserve recognition. It deserves a system that says this matters. There's no doubt about that. The question is, who builds that system? Who runs it? Who's in the room when the criteria gets written, and whose palate is treated as a default? Whose idea of a transcendent meal gets encoded as the standard? Because right now, the answer to all of these questions is a tire company from France that established the system in 1931. And I think we can do better than that. I just don't think we've had the conversations yet about what better actually looks like. What it would mean to have a system that could recognize a grandmother's taco recipe and a 14-course tasting menu with the same seriousness. A system that was built not to get people driving and buying more tires, but to actually honor the full, weird, democratic, chaotic, and beautiful range of what food can do and mean. I don't know what that looks like. I'm not sure that anyone does. But I think the first step is admitting that what we have now is decidedly not that. It's something that started as a pamphlet. It grew into a religion. That has along the way done tremendous things and tremendous damage in equal measure. Now, this tire company didn't ask to be the Vatican of food. but they didn't refuse the role either. And it's time we started asking why we let them have it in the first place. Now, that's this week's episode of Unhospitality, guys. If this episode made you uncomfortable, good. That means it's working. If you have a take as a chef, as a restaurant owner, as someone who works in hospitality that either proves my point or blows it to smithereens, I want to hear from you. Check me out on Instagram, YouTube, anywhere you get your podcasts, and pass this along to someone who works in food and see what their take is. Have them listen to this. As always, thanks for listening. Until the next time, safe travels.